He needed help, but instead, a 22-year-old Tembisa man who was having a mental breakdown was shot dead by police. The incident happened on Monday after Tshepiso Aduan's family called the police to help restrain him and take him to a psychiatric facility. But he was killed while more than 10 officers stood outside his shack. Gervin Whittles has our report.
According to his family, Tshepiso Aduan started having psychiatric episodes a week before the shooting.
We noticed him starting to speak alone. Basically, we were not having the answers of what could be the problem.
He says when Tshepiso tried to grab his grandmother's phone and locked himself in his shack, she decided to call the police for help.
So the guys were saying, no, go inside. He said, no, I can't. We gotta call the police to come and assist. Because now I never saw Tshepiso this much aggressive. It's the first time I'm noticing this. And it seems as if he doesn't even notice I'm his grandmother.
When Tshepiso's grandmother called the officers at this police station, she expected them to take Tshepiso to hospital so that the family could find out why his behavior had changed. Instead, this call for help resulted in him being shot dead.
After this guy entered, within 3 minutes, there were 2 gunshots. He wanted to come and see, and when he was putting the first leg inside the gate, Van der Merwe wanted to exit. That's when my brother said, you killed him, where are you running to?
The Independent Police Investigative Directorate says once it has enough evidence, it will advise the police on whether to suspend the officer from duty.
There's post-mortem that still has to be taken into cognizance. There's the ballistic reports that have to be taken into cognizance. So once there's a particular threshold in terms of evidence that has been gathered, it then informs what IPID does.
The EFF says it will continue campaigning for the accused officer to be suspended until the case is heard in court. Gervin Whittles, Tembisa.
So then the issue of brutality around members of the SAPS is also getting a lot of attention in the Western Cape today. I want to update you on the story of Leo Williams. He's a 9-year-old boy who was shot during community demonstrations in an area there. Monique Mortlock is our reporter on the story. She was there as the head of the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, Jennifer Ntlatseng, went to speak to the family and the community in Langeville. Monique is joining us live now for the latest. Monique, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. Take us through how this little boy died.
So on the 31st of July, there were service delivery protests in Langeville, in St. Helena Bay. It's a small town along the west coast. And during these service delivery protests, Leo was apparently playing in a shack. And it was at this time that a rubber bullet hit him in the head. He was then rushed to hospital. The rubber bullet was allegedly fired by police officers who had been trying to disperse the group of protesters who were running in between the shacks at that time. And Leo then passed away 2 weeks later in hospital. And ever since then, the family has been trying to find out from IPID how far the case is, what's been going on, because obviously they want arrests and they want some sort of closure. And what I heard today from the family is that they also want justice. So that's the story of Leo's passing.
And what has IPID told the family, Monique?
Today, the IPID Executive Director, Jennifer Ntlatseng, told the family that the investigation is at an advanced stage, although she couldn't give specific timelines of how far the investigation is or how far they are in effecting any arrests, if at all. I then asked her, why is it taking so long? And this is what she had to say.
Okay, Monique Mortlock, we don't have that audio from the head of the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, Jennifer Ntlatseng, visiting the family of 9-year-old Leo Williams, shot during a community demonstration. They fired police firing rubber bullets into a protesting crowd. The little boy dying later in hospital, as Monique was explaining. Monique, thank you very much for giving us that all-important context to this tragic story. So we're going to stay then with the issue of police brutality. I'm going to bring in now two guests. We're joined by Richard Mamabolo, he's spokesperson for the policing union Popcru. We're also joined by David Bruce. He is a researcher who specializes in policing and public security. I'm hoping we can bring them up now. All right, let's start with you, David Bruce. You're joining us by Skype. We're dealing today on ENCA with two cases. A young man in his 20s who was having a mental health issue. Police were called in, and during everything that unfolded, he was allegedly shot dead by one of the officers, right? You also have a situation now in the Western Cape where Monique is reporting from, a 9-year-old boy shot when police fired rubber bullets into protesters. He later died in hospital. Why are we seeing this failure by police to deal with children and vulnerable groups?
Well, essentially, this is part of a bigger issue of the way in which the South African Police Service deals with the use of force by its members. So the police work under challenging circumstances, and they often face situations of conflict of one kind or another. And in order for them to be able to deal with these situations in the best and most appropriate way, they need to be better supported by the organization that they work for in order to be able to uphold the right kind of standards in using force. And unfortunately, the SAPS, in many ways, it hasn't moved forward in the last 20 years or so in relation to how it deals with the use of force by its members.
Jacob Mamabolo, let's bring you in from Popcru, having the last sip of your water or your coffee. I'm not sure if you were able to hear the two stories that we played out on air coming into this conversation. A young man in his 20s battling a mental health issue was eventually shot dead by police, as we understand it. You've got 9-year-old Leo Williams shot by rubber bullets when police were firing at protesters in his community. How are officers, your members, prepared to deal with situations where they are responding to a protest or a call and the person on the other end is either a child or another vulnerable member of society?
Yeah, look, we're actually against any form of brutality. I think as a civil rights union, we know that police brutality is a form of a violation to civil rights. So it's unfortunate that we've had such incidents which are being reported. We think that, look, we to deal with the challenges around police brutality, because obviously there are underlying factors, we should obviously work together with communities in ensuring that we have a broad discussion. Since 1994, there has not been any discussion which looks into how police and communities do relate, and I think part of the recurrences of such brutal acts are mainly out of the fact that the relationship has not been so good, and at times you even hear certain leaders speaking badly about police. So that naturally creates bad relations between communities. It's, however, unfortunate, but I think we need to look at the causes thereof, and I think broadly speaking, we would agree that, of course, police come from a challenging past. I think even beyond 1994, the issue around how police have been treated by societies, especially the black society, and what has been happening post-1994 has not been something that we've obviously engaged ourselves on. But as well, you would understand as well that there are many challenges that police officers do face currently. We've got a police population of 190,000, which has to look after a population of 59 million. So the ratio does not add up as well.
I hear all of that, Richard. What I was trying to get from you is the specific training that is given to your members by the SAPS to deal with calls, for example, where someone is battling with mental health, or they are responding to a protest where children somehow happen to be among the protesters, because we know that happens quite often in South Africa, sadly.
Yeah, look, we agree that there definitely needs to be some form of training that obviously is conducted amongst the SAPS in dealing with some of these challenges. I think there have been, when you look at the Falam report as well, it speaks to the need for training as well. But the reality is that the SAPS has not had that capacity since, different reports had come out and not much has been done about it. But however, I think we should not see challenges that are emanating within the service as police matters alone. I think we also, as much as police need to definitely get training, we need to ensure that even communities do understand their roles, especially in terms of protests where, to a certain extent you would, they result in violent acts. We obviously need to know the measures that the minimum force that police can apply should be conducted and all these other dynamics. So it's a collective effort really. But I think one of the things that we obviously need to look into is whether there is sufficient capacity within the SAPS to ensure that all these trainings and many other issues are obviously dealt with.
But Richard, how do you get community buy-in and trust when in the space of a month we reported on the shooting of Nathaniel Julies, allegedly by police? We're dealing with Leo Williams, another child in the Western Cape, also shot allegedly by police. So why should communities even trust members of the SAPS at this stage?
Well, there are two factors, really. I think a majority of our police officers are committed to serving the people of South Africa. So anytime there's an incident of wrongdoing amongst police, the media as well has been having, largely reporting on the negatives of it. But as well, I think when you obviously look at, for example, the uneven allocation of resources within police stations, those are some of the things that when communities call for response or need help and police cannot respond timeously, they then feel that, no, these members are actually useless. And that is one of the things that has obviously generated this kind of relationship. So we need to obviously look into the allocation of resources within stations. I know for sure that most police stations within our townships, within the rural areas, do not have sufficient facilities, whilst when you consider those in affluent areas, they are well resourced. And so some of these things become some of the pointers which we think that such engagements would obviously make communities understand that sometimes it's not about police being lazy, it's about their incapacity to actually perform the kind of duties that they are supposed to.
David Bruce, that is quite a difficult point, though, to drive home to communities, isn't it, when we're seeing almost weekly reports of someone, either an adult and now even children, dying allegedly at the hands of police?
I think, I would agree with the point that you're making, that this is something that profoundly undermines the trust between communities and police. And so, but there's I see it as essentially a failure on the level of leadership, both political leadership and the leadership of the police, to recognize that this is a serious issue and that the whole approach that the police take to the issue of managing the use of force and how their members use force needs to be revisited, and that there needs to be a profound change on this level.
I asked about training to deal with vulnerable groups, including children and people with mental health issues and disabilities. As a researcher, what have you found as far as that in the SAPS?
No, you see that the SAPS has a very, it's a sort of, I could call it a kind of primitive approach to these things. So the training, insofar as, the one thing is that in order to sustain the right kinds of standards by police in using force, one needs ongoing engagement with these kinds of issues. But basically, beyond basic training, primary training that police receive is around the use of firearms. So, for instance, this kind of issue, which is police engagement with, people with who having some kind of mental instability or episode of that kind, is something that is recognized elsewhere as one of the type of challenges that police face, and one of the types of training that is provided to police, and mechanisms have been put in place to assist police in in dealing with these kinds of difficult situations. But in South Africa, we still, in many ways in the dark ages in terms of addressing issues to do with the use of force.
And Richard,
so, if you train people, if the basic training that you provide to people is on shooting their guns, that's what they're going to use to resolve these situations.
And Richard, you were also speaking about the, excuse me, the issue of delays as far as the implementation of recommendations around the training and capacitation of police officers. You are a police union with a voice at that level. What conversations are you having with police management to make sure it happens? And what are they telling you about why it hasn't happened?
Look, we've been having discussions for years on numerous matters, and in fact, on some we've already agreed, but yet they are not implemented. And when you find out what are the reasons behind the lack of implementation, you'll be told about finances. I think, look, basically we do agree that there should be some form of training that goes into that. But as well, I think looking into some of the acts within the SAPS have been there since 1977. For example, one of the identified challenges around police killings, the reasons why we've had so many police killings in the country has been due to the Criminal Procedure Act of 1977, wherein police are expected to give some form of warning before they take any form of action. And in most cases, criminals have not wasted any time. In fact, most police have died because they had wanted to, grab some form of attention before taking any form of action. So there are many other laws that need to be dealt with. But with regards to training as well, I think we might sit down in boardrooms and take good decisions. However, if there is no willingness on the part of the SAPS to implement such, then the problem still lies there. Just last year, there was a shortage of ammunition within the whole country, and you are expecting that we need more police officers to go into their services, yet most of them had not even passed those ammunition tests. So those are the internal contradictions that we think we should deal with. But however, on a broader basis, it's unfortunate that people have to lose their lives, but we cannot necessarily isolate this challenge to police alone. We need to obviously have some concerted effort where we work with communities and we ensure that communities understand their role in relation to the way police operate. And of course, it's going to be very important that police as well abide by the prescripts of the kind of acts that will govern them.
But here's the issue with your response, Richard. You are referring to situations where officers are confronting criminals and they have to fire a warning shot, and sometimes the criminals beat them to it in that exchange of fire, right? What I'm trying to get to is a situation where you've got a 22-year young man who's locked himself in a shack, in a house. He's clearly having some sort of mental breakdown. Police officers are called in to try and help restrain him. Somehow, during all of that, he's shot and he dies. That is very different from what you are talking about, which relates to armed criminals.
Yeah, the problem is that you want me to respond to one specific issue, but I'm telling you that there are broader challenges within policing.
But that's the topic. What we're speaking about is the issue of police officers who, in 3 cases just this month, are accused of killing vulnerable people. Nathaniel Julies, the young man, the 22-year-old, and young Leo Williams in the Western Cape.
We have made it clear that it's quite unfortunate, and of course we agree that there should be some form of training which would ensure that police obviously work within the correct prescripts and communities are also protected. But as well, it's good that this discussion is happening so that we then have more community members as well forming part of the discussion so that we can find a common way forward. However, we do agree that it's quite unfortunate that people have to die for not having done any wrong, really.
David Bruce, IPID is supposed to investigate any allegations of wrongdoing against police officers. Are they moving fast enough through that caseload, because it is rising?
Right, well, there's definitely are issues to do with IPID, but I think that what worries me is that consistently when we're talking about this issue, we end up talking about issues like whether IPID has the right resources or whether there are problems with IPID or not. But the basic issues are issues to do with policing in South Africa. The police are the people who have killed these people. And all of these deaths should have been avoided. And so we need to look at the way in which police are exercising control over the manner in which their members use force. You cannot address this kind of problem through an external agency such as IPID. IPID can play a complementary role in promoting accountability, and where police are upholding appropriate standards, they can contribute to promoting greater trust in the police, in fact. But where you have systematic deficiencies in the way in which the police organization is using force, an external agency such as IPID cannot resolve this problem. It needs to be addressed. It requires recognition at a political level that there is a problem here that needs to be resolved. And it needs sustained attention by leaders within the police organization in order to resolve these kinds of problems.
Okay.
You cannot resolve it by an oversight agency such as IPID.
David Bruce, researcher specialising in policing and public security. Richard Mamabolo, spokesperson for the policing union Popcru. Gentlemen, thank you very much both for your time this afternoon.